Hi there, let's crochet Lola. First, grab your set and remove the lid. I'll actually use it to store the items I won't need. Here you've got the care instructions, along with the yarn. Set aside the smaller yarn skeins for the moment. You'll need the hook and the pink yarn. In this little bag, you'll also find the stitch markers. You'll need those too. Set the stuffing aside. Now take the yarn, remove the label, and locate the yarn tail. Place the yarn ball inside the tin. This way the yarn will stay clean and unravel smoothly. It will also help you control the tension in the yarn. Okay, let's begin with the magic ring. I'll demonstrate a hands-only method, although there are plenty methods using a hook. Take the yarn holding the yarn tail with your left hand and the working yarn with your right hand. Now let's start with the base of the ring. Place the working yarn over the tail and pinch where they intersect. Now pull the working yarn out of the loop that we've just created. Give this new loop a twist to form a cross at the base, then pull the working yarn through this loop, tightening it until the knot is snug but not too tight. Pull on the working yarn to adjust the loop to fit the size of the hook. Now test the magic. Pull on the yarn tail, and if your ring tightens up, you've got it right. Adjust the ring to make sure it's not too big. Then put the yarn tail back inside the ring so that these two yarn strands remain together. Grab the hook and slide it into the loop. To adjust the loop to fit the size of the hook, simply pull on the working yarn. The loop should be just the size of the tip of the hook so that it is easy to slide the hook through. Turn your palm face up and position the yarn on your pinky and ring finger. Fold the fingers passing the yarn behind and over the middle finger and pointer. Keep the magic ring on the middle finger. Secure the ring with your thumb, leaving space for the hook. Maintain tension in both the working yarn and the ring. For row 1, let's make 6 single stitches. Put the hook through the ring and grab the working yarn from underneath. Pull the hook out of the ring, forming another loop on the hook that's about the same size as the previous one. Yarn over again, and this time twist the tip of the hook downwards to secure the yarn and pull it through both of the loops on the hook. Now you've made your first single stitch. We got 5 more to do. Check the size of the loop on the hook and continue adding stitches. Put your hook through the ring and grab the working yarn, pulling the hook out. Yarn over again, twist the tip of the hook and pull the working yarn through both loops on the hook. Repeat these steps to create 4 more single stitches. Once you're done with all 6 stitches, pull on the hook to make a larger loop. This will save our last stitch from falling apart. Here you can see we've got our 6 stitches all lined up. Each stitch has the shape of a V. The largest loop you pulled out with the hook is not considered a stitch. Now let's tighten the magic ring. Get the yarn tail out and pinch the last stitch in the ring. Pull on the yarn tail so that the ring tightens, but not all the way. To count your stitches, turn your work so that the edge is facing you and begin counting from the first stitch. You can gently pinch each stitch to make it easier to see. Now let's find the second stitch. This is the first one and the second one. Grab a stitch marker and slide it under the V of the second stitch. This is going to help us in the next round. So here's the first stitch and the second one. Grab another stitch marker and put it into the next V, so into the third stitch. Here is our row 1 with 6 single stitches. In round 2, we're going to have to make 6 increases. An increase is typically 2 single stitches made in the same stitch of the previous round. Increases are used to shape our project, and in our case, we need to start widening our circle to shape Lola's head. Let's take a closer look at the formulas. In crochet, a C means single crochet stitch. In row 1, you make 6 single stitches. In row 2, INC means increase. You make 6 increases, and each increase is 2 stitches. So 6 times 2 equals 12 stitches for row 2. The number in the brackets tells you how many stitches you'll have by the end of the row. The formulas in row 1 and row 2 are relatively simple. However, more complex formulas exist. For example, let's examine row 3. The formula for row 3 reveals numbers within square brackets multiplied by another number, and the final number in brackets indicates the stitches you should have at the end of the row. What's inside the brackets represents a sequence, which in this case is a single stitch followed by an increase. This sequence is then multiplied by 6, meaning you repeat it 6 times to complete the row. And as a result, you will get 18 stitches in that row. Now let's start the second row. Put your hook in the loop and tighten it, and get your yarn in working position. In row 2, we need to make 6 increases. Put your hook under the first stitch that's not marked, and make sure you have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull the yarn out of that stitch. Yarn over again and pull the working yarn through both loops on the hook. This completes the first stitch of the second round. Mark the stitch with a stitch marker to indicate the starting point. Now let's proceed with the increase. Reinsert the hook into the same stitch where the first single crochet of this round was made. Then create another single crochet in that same stitch from the previous round. That completes our first increase, which we've made in the first stitch of the round. Now let's move on to the second stitch and work our second increase. Remove the stitch marker and put your hook under the V of the second stitch and work a single stitch. Reinsert the hook into the same stitch and work another single stitch. Now that the second increase is complete, let's create the third one into the third stitch. So remove the stitch marker and insert your hook under the V of the third stitch. And work 2 single stitches into this stitch. Now we have completed 3 increases and have 3 more to do. Once you're done with row 2, pull out the hook and we're going to tighten up the ring. Turn your work around and find the yarn tail, then pinch your project and pull on the yarn tail to ensure that the ring center is nice and tight. Once that's done, count the stitches starting with a marker. That's stitch number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Begin row 3 by following a simple pattern, 1 single crochet followed by an increase. First, remove the stitch marker and reinsert the hook into the loop, adjusting the loop to fit snugly around the hook. Make your first single crochet into the first stitch of the previous row. Locate the stitch and insert your hook into it. Complete the single crochet. After making this stitch, place a stitch marker underneath it to mark the beginning of the round. Next, proceed to the second stitch of the row and perform an increase. Once you're done, you should have made 3 stitches into the first 2 stitches of the previous round. Now repeat this pattern by putting a single stitch into the third stitch of the row and an increase into the fourth stitch of the row. You should end up having 18 stitches in row 3. After finishing each row, count the stitches to ensure that you have the correct number. Starting with the stitch marker, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Remember, the last large loop isn't considered a stitch. Identify the right side of your crochet project by the presence of only vertical bars. The wrong side will feature both vertical and horizontal bars, forming a distinct texture. While crocheting, you always want to hold your project with the right side facing you. When counting stitches on the right side of your project, begin by locating the magic ring and the 6 single stitches. Next, you'll notice that the second row starts with a bump. Directly under this bump is the first stitch of the second round. This stitch corresponds to the hole under the V, similar to the hole under this V, but is the first stitch of the second round where we placed an increase. You'll find that 2 posts trace back into this hole, and as you follow along the round, you'll encounter 5 more instances where 2 posts trace back into the same hole, indicating the 6 increases. The first stitch of the third round is a single stitch, so there's just 1 post tracing back into that hole. In the second stitch, you'll find 2 posts tracing back into that hole. That was the increase that we made. Then again, a single stitch and an increase, a single stitch and an increase. By examining the right side of your project, you can accurately count the stitches. This method is essential for identifying any errors. In row 4, we are going to follow a pattern of 2 single stitches followed by an increase. Once you removed your stitch marker, place the first single stitch into the first stitch of the previous row. Place the stitch marker in the first stitch to mark off the beginning of the round, and continue by creating another single stitch in the next stitch of the previous row. Now make an increase into the third stitch of the previous row. Continue making 2 single stitches followed by an increase till the end of the round. Once you're done, you should have 24 stitches in round 4. Before moving on to row 5, count the stitches to make sure you have 24. If you discover that you have too few or too many stitches in a row, first identify the mistake by counting the posts. Then pinch the last correct stitch to keep it secure and carefully unravel all the stitches beyond it. Next, reinsert the hook into the small loop just above the stitch you've saved and proceed to complete the round correctly. In row 5, follow a sequence of 3 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat the sequence 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 30 stitches. In rounds 6 through 10, work 30 single stitches in each round. Begin by removing the stitch marker, then reinsert it into the first stitch of each new row. Continue by working 5 rows, each with 30 stitches. Counting rows is simple. Start at the very center. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If you count on the opposite side to the bump, you should have the same result. I had finished 8 rows and still have 2 more to do. In row 11, the pattern to follow involves 3 single stitches followed by a decrease. A decrease is essentially the reverse of an increase, where 2 stitches are combined into one. This effectively reduces the total number of stitches in the row. Start by making the first single crochet into the first stitch of the previous round, and of course mark it off as the beginning of the round with a stitch marker. Make 2 more single stitches in a row. Now begin the decrease by inserting your hook through the next stitch, catching only the front bar. Do the same with the stitch that follows. This will leave you with 3 loops on your hook. Now yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. Finally, yarn over again and pull through these last 2 loops to complete the decrease. Repeat the pattern of 3 single stitches followed by a decrease 5 more times. At the end of the row, you should be left with 24 stitches. In row 12, we are going to repeat the pattern of 2 single stitches followed by a decrease, a total of 6 times. By the end of the round, we should have 18 stitches. Start off by creating the first single crochet stitch for round 12 and mark it off with a stitch marker. Then create another single crochet stitch followed by a decrease. Count the number of stitches in this row to double check that you've got exactly 18. Before we move on to row 13, we're going to put in the eyes. The eyes come with a silver pad that makes them shine, as well as a backing that you use to lock the eye in place. Once you put on that backing, it's going to be very hard to take it off. Before we start putting the eyes in, let's figure out where to put them. Make sure that the bump of the second row is turned to the left. Begin by counting rows from the center of the head down to identify the 6th and the 7th rows. The eyes will be placed between these rows. Select a hole in this area and insert your hook to widen it. Then grab a stitch marker and put it as a placeholder for the first eye. Double check to make sure that you've got the stitch marker exactly between rows 6 and 7. To position the second eye, count 5 holes from the first eye to the right. Then put your hook through the 6th hole, which will be the spot for the second eye. Widen the hole a little bit with your hook and put a stitch marker as a placeholder to mark the position of the second eye. Make sure you've got exactly 5 holes between the stitch markers. You can also check by the posts. You should have exactly 6 posts between the stitch markers. Now let's replace the first stitch marker with an actual eye. Use the stitch marker to widen the hole a little bit so that the eye goes through easily. Put your thumb close to that hole so you don't lose it, and put the eye in that hole. Once you're done, go ahead and remove the second stitch marker, widening the hole again, and place the eye inside the hole. Turn your work inside out again and place the backing on this eye. Once you're done, you should have 3 posts between the eyes. In row 13, we're going to alternate between a single stitch and a decrease. Remove the stitch marker and start by creating the first single stitch. Mark off the beginning of the round. Continue by creating a decrease. Make sure you only pick up the front bars of the next 2 stitches and pull the working yarn through those bars first, then yarn over and finish off the decrease. Repeat this pattern 5 more times, and by the end of the row you should have 12 stitches. When you're done with the last increase, pull the hook out and count the stitches to make sure you have 12. Now is the perfect timing to start stuffing our toy. Get some of the stuffing and make sure it's nice and even. Spread it out with your fingers where necessary. Only half fill the head with the stuffing to avoid it getting in the way during the next rounds of crocheting. Gradually, we will add more stuffing as we go. Make sure to put the stuffing in neatly so that none of it is sticking out. Now squish the head and check if it's still too soft. You can add a little more stuffing to it. Just be careful not to overfill. Once you're done stuffing the head, move on to the next row. In row 14, we're gonna make 12 single stitches. Remove your stitch marker and get a hold of the yarn. Use your middle finger as a barrier between the stuffing and the crochet piece. This will help to avoid the hook catching the stuffing and pulling it through to the right side of your work. Create your first single stitch and mark it off with a stitch marker. Continue by creating 11 more single crochet stitches. In row 15, we're going to follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase. And repeat that pattern 6 times. Get a hold of the working yarn and let's start row 15. Once you've removed the stitch marker, create your first single stitch for this round and mark it off as the beginning of the round. Continue by working an increase into the next stitch. Then repeat this pattern 5 more times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. Once you're done with the last increase, remove the hook and count the stitches starting with the stitch marker. Make sure you've got 18. In row 16, we're going to repeat the pattern of 2 single stitches followed by an increase a total of 6 times. That's going to bring us to 24 stitches in this row. Then make an increase into the following stitch. Before moving on to row 17, count the stitches starting with the stitch marker. You should have 24. In row 17, we need to make 24 single stitches. Count your stitches before moving on to row 18. In row 18, we are going to repeat a pattern of 6 single stitches followed by a decrease, a total of 3 times. By the end of the row, you should have 21 stitches. Once you're done with your last decrease, pull out the hook and count the stitches to make sure you've got exactly 21. In row 19, make a total of 21 single stitches. In row 20, follow a sequence of 5 single stitches followed by a decrease. Repeat the sequence 3 times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. Once you've made your first single stitch, don't forget to put a marker underneath it and follow along with 4 more single stitches. Then, perform a decrease. After that, you will want to repeat the pattern 2 more times. Before moving on, make sure to count your stitches. You should have 18 stitches in this row. In row 21, we're going to follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by a decrease, and repeat that 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 12 stitches. Once you're done, count the number of stitches in this row. You should have 12. You're very close to completing the body, so now it's time to fully stuff it, as the next round will close it off. Add the stuffing in small pieces, distributing it evenly between the head and the body. Remember not to overfill the toy so it remains nice and squishy, and the neck is narrow. In row 22, which is the last row of the body, we are going to make 6 decreases. Once you're done, you should have 6 stitches in the row. Cut off the working yarn, leaving a yarn tail for sewing. The yarn tail should be around 8 inches long. Now let's fasten off the body. To do that, grab the tapestry needle and thread it with the yarn. Remove the stitch marker from your piece as it's no longer needed. Start by inserting the needle into the stitch where the stitch marker was, from the inside to the outside. Ensure that you're catching only the front bar of the stitch. Then pass the needle through every second stitch in the same manner. After threading through 3 stitches, pull the yarn tail to tighten the center. Next, insert the needle into the stitch right beneath the yarn tail and bring it out on the opposite side of the body. To hide the yarn tail, insert the needle into a stitch either directly above or below where it came out of, avoiding the creation of horizontal bars on the toy's body. Pass the needle and the yarn through the entire body of your piece, exiting at any stitch you choose. To secure the yarn tail even more, create another fixing stitch. Insert the needle into a stitch either directly below or above the exit point, but ensure it's only one stitch away. This ensures that the yarn tail is firmly anchored. Once the fixing stitch is complete, bring the needle out on the back of the body. Be careful not to pull the yarn tail too tight, as this can create dents. If a dent does form, gently slide the needle under the affected stitch and nudge it upward to restore its normal shape. Begin the ear with a magic ring. After making the ring, insert the hook and check that the ring functions properly. Crochet 4 single stitches into the ring. Once you're done, pull the yarn tail to tighten the ring. Be careful not to over-tighten it, as this can make working the first stitch in the next row difficult. In the second row, create 4 increases to make 8 stitches. Insert the hook through the first stitch of the previous round and make sure you have 3 loops on your hook. Then perform the first single stitch and mark it off as the beginning of the round. Create another single stitch into the same stitch where the first one is to create the first increase. Follow along, creating 3 more increases. After completing the increases, your work should start curving. If not, help it with your fingers. After that, confirm you have exactly 8 stitches in this round, and let's move on to round number 3. For the third row, alternate a single stitch with an increase. Repeat this sequence 4 times. This should result in 12 stitches. Count the stitches before moving on to the next row. In row 4, make 2 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat the sequence 4 times. By the end of the row, you should have 16 stitches. Count the stitches and ensure you've got 16. Rows 5 through 7 will each have 16 single stitches. In row 8, make 2 single stitches followed by a decrease. Repeat the sequence 4 times. By the end of the round, you should have 12 stitches. In rows 9 and 10, create 12 single stitches each. In row 11, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by a decrease. Repeat this pattern 4 times. At the end of the round, you should have 8 stitches. For rows 12 through 15, make 8 single stitches in each row. Remove the stitch marker once you're done, and let's move on to completing the ear. To complete the ear, fold your work in half, aligning 3 pairs of stitches. Insert your hook through the first pair of stitches, yarn over, and make a single crochet. Repeat this for the second and the third pairs of stitches. After crocheting both parts of the ear together, cut the yarn, leaving an 8-inch tail for sewing. Follow the same steps to make the second ear. Start crocheting the leg with a magic ring. For row 1, put 6 single stitches into the ring. Once you're done with row 1, pull on the yarn tail to tighten the ring. In row 2, make 6 increases. You should have a total of 12 stitches in row 2. Remember to always mark the beginning of the round with a stitch marker. In row 3, make 12 single stitches. In row 4, we're going to repeat a sequence of a single stitch and a decrease a total of 4 times. By the end of the row, you should have 8 stitches. Once you're done with row 4, remove the hook and confirm you've got exactly 8 stitches in this round. Now tighten the magic ring by pulling on the yarn tail and hide the yarn tail inside the leg. Now grab a little tiny bit of stuffing and put it inside of the leg. To avoid pulling onto the stuffing with the hook, ensure that none of the stuffing is coming out. In rows 5 and 6, make 8 single stitches each. To complete the leg, crochet 3 single stitches through both sides of the round. Fold your work in half, aligning 3 pairs of stitches. Then put your hook through the first pair and create your first single stitch. Do the same with the second and the third pairs of stitches. Once you're done, cut off the yarn, leaving an 8-inch tail. Pull the yarn tail out of the last stitch. Start creating the arm with a magic ring. In row 1, put 6 single stitches into your magic ring. Tighten the magic ring. Remember not to over tighten it, and move on to row 2. In row 2, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase, and repeat this 3 times. As a result, you should have 9 stitches. In row 3, make a total of 9 single stitches. Now let's tighten the magic ring. Pull on the yarn tail, and once your ring is tight, grab the yarn tail and place it inside the arm. Then continue crocheting row 4. In row 4, we are going to follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by a decrease, and repeat that 3 times. As a result, you should have 6 stitches in this row. In rows 5 and 6, make 6 single stitches each. Once you're done with row 6, pull out the hook and remove the stitch marker. To complete the arm, crochet 2 single stitches through both sides of the round. Cut off the yarn, leaving an 8-inch tail, and pull the yarn tail through the last stitch. To make the belly, start with a magic ring. For row 1 of the belly, make 6 single stitches into the magic ring. In row 2, make 6 increases. This should result in 12 stitches in the round. In row 3, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase, and repeat it 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. After completing row 3, remove the hook and cut the yarn, ensuring the tail is at least 3 times the circumference of the piece. This length, which allows the yarn to wrap around the rim 3 times, is sufficient for sewing this part onto the body. Pull the yarn tail completely through the stitch. To perform an invisible fasten off, thread the yarn tail through a tapestry needle, then pass the needle under the next stitch and out the other side. In this case, it doesn't matter if you do it from left to right or right to left. Next, insert the needle back into the last stitch made before cutting the yarn, sliding it between the 2 bars of that stitch. Guide the needle out on the wrong side of the project, and for extra security, you can also pass the needle through the horizontal bar of this stitch. This technique mimics the stitch pattern and creates an invisible fasten off. To make the paw, create a magic ring and put 6 single stitches into it. Once you're done, remove the hook and tighten the magic ring. Cut off the yarn and pull the yarn tail out. Perform an invisible fasten off. To make the tail, start with a magic ring. In row 1, make 8 single stitches into the magic ring. In row 2, make 8 single stitches. Once you're done with row 2, remove the stitch marker, cut off the yarn tail, and pull the yarn tail through the last stitch. Perform an invisible fasten off. To sew the paw onto the leg, start by threading the yarn tail from the magic ring through a tapestry needle. Make sure you're using the yarn tail from the magic ring and not from the invisible fasten off. Insert the needle into the center of the first row on the leg and guide it out on the other side. Leave this yarn tail aside for now. Thread the other yarn tail through the needle. Begin sewing the paw onto the leg by inserting the needle through the leg, not the paw, guiding it out at the next stitch between rounds 1 and 2. I recommend starting off where the bump of the second row is. You have the option to sew on the piece either clockwise or anti-clockwise. The direction won't affect the final result, so you can choose what feels comfortable for you. Guide the needle back into the paw at the same stitch where the yarn exited. Then insert the needle into the next stitch on the paw from top to bottom and enter the corresponding stitch on the leg. Guide the needle out in the next stitch. Bring the needle back into the paw from bottom to top and guide it into the next stitch of the paw from top to bottom. Finish off sewing on the paw. And remember to always insert the needle into the paw from bottom to top when coming from the leg, and from top to bottom when going from the paw into the leg. This ensures an invisible seam. To create the toes, stitch 3 small vertical lines just above the paw. Ensure the leg is positioned correctly and is not upside down. Identify the top of the leg by locating where the slope has formed. Then select the position of your toes and create the vertical stitches. Guide the needle out into the same stitch where the other yarn tail is. And once you're happy with your result, grab the 2 white yarn tails and tie them together twice. After that is done, cut off the yarn tails and tie the knot inside the leg using a tapestry needle. To attach the belly to the body, begin by positioning it against the body. Use the eyes as a guide to find its central spot. Thread the yarn tail from the magic ring through a needle and insert it into the body at the determined center of the belly. Direct the needle out on the other side. Leave this yarn tail aside for now. Next, take the yarn tail from the invisible fasten off and thread it through the tapestry needle. Start sewing in the same manner as you did with the paws. Insert the needle into the stitch that is directly under the yarn tail and guide the needle from bottom to top through the stitch where you made the invisible fasten off. Then reinsert the needle into the belly at the stitch adjacent to the yarn tail where the invisible fasten off was complete. Continue sewing, ensuring that each time the needle enters the body, it goes through the stitches directly beneath the belly's rim. As you saw, you want to regularly check to ensure the belly remains correctly positioned. If it shifts, gently adjust it back and forth to realign it as needed. After sewing on the belly, thread the needle through both the belly and the body, guiding it towards the back of the piece. Leave the tail at the back for now. Now let's sew in the legs. All you need are the legs and the tapestry needle. Position the first leg and align it with the center of the body. Place the leg against the body and ensure that the center of the last round of the body aligns with the yarn tail on the leg. Turn your project to face you and double check the position of the leg. Once you're happy with the position, grab a stitch marker and pin the leg to the body. Then grab the second leg and position it symmetrically to the first one. Turn your project to face you to double check and confirm the position. Make any necessary adjustments and pin the second leg to the body. Grab the tapestry needle and let's thread it with the yarn tail of the first leg. Now put your needle into the stitch of the body that is directly under the yarn tail. Bring the needle out on the other side of the leg, matching it up with the last stitch of the leg seam. Insert the needle from the bottom to the top through the leg. Then insert the needle into the stitch directly under the yarn tail and guide it out at the back of the body. Remove the stitch marker for now. Now let's move on to sewing the second leg. Thread its yarn tail through the needle. Insert the needle into the stitch that is directly under the yarn tail, bringing it out in the very center where you have positioned the first leg. Ensure both legs are symmetrical and that their seams meet at the very center. Now pass your needle through the last stitch of the leg's seam. Next, insert your needle into the stitch directly beneath the leg and guide it out at the back of the body. Once both legs are attached, check their positioning to ensure everything looks right. To further secure the legs and maintain them in a sitting position, you will add extra stitches. Grab the yarn tail from any leg and thread it through the needle. Insert the needle into the body and guide it out of the middle stitch of the leg. Then insert the needle through the leg into the body, 1 or 2 rows above the seam. Then guide the needle out of any stitch on the body. This extra stitching connects the leg more firmly to the body, keeping it in the desired position. Repeat this process with the second leg. Once you're done sewing on the second leg, bring the needle with the yarn tail out of the stitch where the yarn tail of the first leg is. Make sure you're happy with the position of the legs and let's hide the yarn tails. To hide the yarn tails, make sure that they're coming out of the same stitch. Tie them together twice and cut off the excess yarn. Leave the knot as it is for now. To sew in the arms, first fit them onto the body in your preferred position. Prepare the needle in advance by threading it with the yarn tail of one of the arms. Once you have decided on the position of the arms, let go of one arm and pick up the yarn needle. Insert the needle through the stitch on the body that is directly beneath the yarn tail. Then guide it out of the stitch on the body that aligns with the last stitch of the arm seam. Pass the needle through the last stitch of the arm seam from back to front. After this, guide the needle through the middle stitch of the arm seam and out to the back of the body. Repeat this process for the second arm. Before sewing on the tail, let's hide some of the yarn tails. To do that, we need to reposition the yarn tails so that they form pairs, with each pair coming out from the same stitch. After pairing up all the yarn tails, tie each pair with 2 knots and trim the excess yarn. Hide all of the tails except for the one that doesn't have a pair. Once you're done tying up all pairs of yarn tails, use the tapestry needle to push all the knots into the body. Let's start sewing the tail. Position the tail low enough to ensure the toy can sit properly. Once you found the position for the tail, insert the needle into the stitch on the body that aligns with the center of the tail. Then take the yarn tail from the magic ring on the inside of the tail and thread it through the needle. Pull the needle through the body, guiding it out at the back. Thread the needle with the other yarn tail. Start by inserting the needle into the stitch on the body that is directly beneath the yarn tail. Guide the needle out at the next stitch on the body that is aligned with the rim of the tail. Now put the needle through the tail's next stitch from inside to outside. If the needle pokes into the yarn and doesn't go through the stitch fully, gently pull it back, adjust and re-enter the stitch. Then for the next stitch on the tail, go from outside to inside. Put the needle back into the body right under this stitch. Remember that after coming out of the body, Go through the tail from inside to outside. Then outside to inside when going through the tail into the body. This way the seam will remain invisible. Continue sewing on the tail. At this point, you might want to check if your toy is able to sit. Once you're done sewing the tail, match up all 3 of the white yarn tails that you've got at the back. Tie them all together twice and cut off the excess yarn. Then hide the knot in the body. Finally, let's sew on the ears. Position the ears between the second and third rows on the head, making sure the whole seam lies between these 2 rows. Once you're happy with the placement, hold one ear in place and start sewing it with the prepared needle. Insert the needle into the stitch right under the yarn tail and guide it through to the other side of the ear's seam. Then bring the needle back out through the ear and back into the body in the stitch just under the yarn tail. Then guide the needle out at the back of the head. Repeat these steps with the second ear. Once you're happy with the position of the ears, make sure to make at least one more fixing stitch and then hide the yarn tails as usual. To embroider the nose, take the black yarn and thread it through the needle. Insert the needle through the back of the head and bring it out at the front at the stitch where you want to start the nose. Clear up any stuffing that comes out along the way. First, make a horizontal line between the eyes for the top part of the T-shaped nose. Ensure that the vertical part of the nose is directly under the horizontal top part. Next, stitch the vertical line for the T-shape. Guide the needle out at the back of the head. After sewing the nose, check for any dents on the face. If you find a dent, gently push the stitches up from underneath using the needle. And once you're satisfied with the nose, match up the yarn tails, tie them together, and hide the knot inside the body. Once you're done with the nose, your toy is finished. I hope you enjoyed the project. Please don't forget to take a picture of your toy and share it with us. Thank you, and bye for now.